Howdy doody, buckaroonies. Today I am excited on the nerdiest possible level because I finally get to make this video. I have wanted to make this video for years, but I've never been able to do it because typically I'm under like 500 million NDA agreements at any given time. Recently, I got to work with Lunacy Audio on an expansion pack for their synthesizer Cube called Rumble, and not only do I get to show you how I made it, but today I get to tell you about how I make a living as a professional sound designer. Fair warning right up front here, most of this stuff is unsurprisingly not that glamorous or exciting, but it is important stuff, especially if you want to do this as a career. I haven't really seen many, if any, videos covering this topic, let alone from someone who actually does this stuff professionally. So today, I wanted to at least try and give you a relatively comprehensive look at a day in the life. I'm gonna try my luck at being really bold here and answer the big question first. How do you find work? I think really there are two main ways to find work in this industry. You can go out and find the work yourself, or you can wait for the work to find you. At this point, I'm in a very privileged position in that typically the clients come to me, but I've been doing this stuff for a while. I've built up a pretty sizable network of connections, and of course, having this channel as a platform to help enable me to do the things I want to do doesn't really hurt either. For those of you just getting started though, what really helped me in the beginning was just sitting down and making a spreadsheet of different sample labels, plugin companies, and hardware companies I wanted to work with, and then I would reach out to them through the old-fashioned email. It's also a good idea to build up a basic portfolio showing some of the sounds and presets you've made, maybe even offer a free download as an example pack of content, and of course take the time to make some high-quality demos and a high-quality website to show yourself off. As much as it pains me to say it, a lot like the rest of the music industry, sound design is one of those things where raw talent is usually kind of secondary. If you look like the right person for the job, you'll be the person to get the job every time. Of course, you still need the skills to back that up or you're gonna get fired, but looking like you've got your shit together and being a good person to talk to will always get you farther than being the best sound designer in the world who's rude, has a crappy portfolio and website, and just isn't someone who's fun to hang out with. Once we have a gig, the first thing to happen is usually the outline or brief, and this usually comes either in an email or in some kind of initial meeting. Because there are some non-disclosure things here, I can't show you the exact notes or details or emails from Lunacy Audio, but I can give you a rough outline. In short, Lunacy Audio wanted to make a bass-focused library that had a modern, hybrid sound, and they wanted to make sure it didn't sound like just another trailer library of impacts, bass hits, and Brahms. During these initial meetings and briefs, I also like to establish the key details like what I'm doing, what it's for, what the deliverables are, what the deadlines are, and if there are any special considerations for the project. For this project, it was pretty straightforward. I'm creating the raw multi-samples that are going to be put into the Cube engine for the other sound designers to make presets from, and then I'm also going to be part of the preset design team to make some additional presets for this expansion pack. As well, usually you'll set up fees and all that up front, and talking money is always pretty uncomfortable, but it is a really important skill to have, especially if this is something that you want to be your job. Setting rates is always a little bit tricky, but usually the thing that works for me is just having a general day rate. To do this, I figure how much I want to make per hour based off my general hourly rate, estimate how many days the project is going to take me, multiply the two together, and use that to set my baseline. Of course, this is also going to come down to what budget the client has available, but it's important to know your minimums to make sure it's a project that's actually going to pay you for your time. No matter what you're doing though, as my dad would say, never do what you're good at for free. If you're gonna work for free for anyone, it should always be for yourself, growing your own brand and serving your own interests. You're worth your time, and anyone who tells you otherwise, you can just politely tell them to f*** off. With all the basics out of the way, it's time to get our ducks in order and get things organized. Whenever I start a new project, I have a basic organizational template that I use to cover my bases. It's really easy to get excited and forget to do the basics, so it's nice to have a system in place to make sure I don't get ahead of myself and don't screw myself over in the later stages of a project. First off, I like to create a new master folder where everything lives for that project, and in there I'll create subfolders for things like DAW sessions, raw sample files, and any other parts of the project to keep them separate and organized. Once that's done, I set up the folder to be automatically backed up to my home server just in case disaster strikes. Always back up your stuff, and if you haven't done that lately, you should probably pause this video right now and go do that. From there, I'll outline the project and try to set up an order of operations and a basic checklist of what I need to get done and when I need to do it to get the job done. Now we can go into the good stuff and get started making some noise. I was given a direction and an outline for this project, but I was also afforded a pretty good degree of creative freedom to just do whatever I felt was best, but of course that's not always the case. When you don't have as much flexibility and freedom, rule number one is always do things on time and on brief. Lunacy sent over a reference playlist of songs that were similar to the sounds they were looking for, and I also spent a good deal of time going through some recent soundtracks as well as some sample packs from other sound labels to get some ideas and inspiration to give myself a few different directions to explore. Because so many other sound designers were involved in this project, I figured it would also be important to try and avoid my first instincts with the sounds so that I could explore some alternative directions that would bring something more unique to the library. Usually with sound design projects, when time allows, I like to give myself a day or two to just play around and explore. I'll pull out all my favorite gear and plugins and just make a bunch of noise and see what I come up with. Typically, about 90% of this ends up being just useless garbage, but there's 10% of it that turns out to be really cool, and it's that 10% that informs me and inspires me for the direction for the rest of the sounds. For my sounds for this project, I wanted to focus more on organic analog sources, but manipulate them in the DAW to get a sort of hybrid take on the overall sonic vibe. To create the sounds, I put together a big grab bag of some of my favorite analog gear that I thought would be ripe for some big bassy madness. The PWM Malevolent, the Arturia Polybrute, and the Create Audio East Beast and West Pest. To balance things out and give a little more sonic variety, I also wanted to grab my Waldorf Iridium because I figured that would be a nice contrast with the otherwise analog sound palette. The Malevolent is a semi-modular analog synth that just makes some incredibly nasty bass lines. This is probably one of my favorite pieces of gear I've gotten my hands on recently, and this thing is just a ton of fun. The Polybrute, of course, is sort of the Cadillac of modern analog. It does everything from classic analog bass stabs to some more wacky bassy weirdness thanks to the incredibly detailed mod matrix. The Create Audio East Beast and West Pest are some very interesting and actually very affordable semi-modular synthesizers. I had a lot of fun playing with these things on their own, connecting the two together to make some different sounds, and even interfacing them with the PWM Malevolent to create some really wild stuff. With the Iridium, I wanted to create some sounds to reinforce the analog stuff. I also figured this would be a good opportunity to get into some more exotic territory that analog synths just can't quite cover. In the end, I mostly used this to create morphing FM basses and sounds with more complex filtering and layering that just otherwise wouldn't be possible. To sample everything for this project, and as I do with pretty much every other project when I'm doing sampling, I used a piece of software called Sample Robot. This is a specialty piece of sampling software that just makes my life way easier and can pretty much automate the entire sampling process. Because all of these synthesizers support MIDI, all I really had to do was set up the project, tell it the range of notes to sample, and set up the dynamic layers. This project needed two dynamic layers, one that's softer and one that's a bit more aggressive or twisted. So in Sample Robot, I would just record the first pass of everything and then tweak the parameters of the synthesizer for the second dynamic layer and then record that. Another big part of this project was setting up the loop points, because these sounds can't just be played forever or else the file sizes would just be massive. Although you can't manually set these up in other programs, Sample Robot can actually do this all automatically, and that saves a huge amount of time. Once the raw sounds were all done, I imported them to Reaper to do all the batch processing. Like Sample Robot, Reaper can automate a lot of processes that are really tedious otherwise, so this is a huge time saver and I can't recommend it enough for this kind of work. For each sound, I designed processing chains that I thought would be interesting with things like different filters, distortion types, EQ, and compression, and tied it all together with some PSP and Finistrip to enhance the pseudo-analog hybrid organic vibes. Reaper makes all this really easy because I can just create a processing chain, copy it, and then paste it to all the other samples in that sound set instead of needing to manually do them all one at a time. Once all the sounds were done, I can just normalize them to get them all set up to the proper level and get them exported. Reaper also makes the final export process really simple because I can set up custom titles for the files to organize them with the proper naming structure and also export the files with the embedded loop points from Sample Robot so I don't have to do that all over again. Once all that was done and squared away, I shipped off the sounds to Lunacy Audio, and a couple days later I got a new build of Cube back with all the sounds they selected as well as all the sounds from all the other sound designers so that I could get started on preset design. For the preset design, I used a lot of the same references as I did for the raw sound design, but I also took some time to sit down and come up with a short list of the types of sounds I wanted to create, like impacts, rhythmic loops, and sequences. Similar to designing the raw sounds, I think it's always a good idea to have a bit of playtime to go around and explore making a bunch of different sounds. Then I'll go back and pick the winners out of that batch to try and build the rest of the preset pack around those once I find a clear direction for the sounds. In the end, I had 13 sounds make the final cut for the pack, which I'm pretty happy with given that the Lunacy Audio team is usually pretty picky about their stuff. And I won't bore you with all the details, but here are just a few of my favorites. Sound design as a career is a ton of fun, and I think it's one of my favorite parts of what I do. Like any other job, of course, it's a good amount of hard work, but I think it's definitely something that makes for an incredibly fulfilling job and one that's really interesting. There's always a new challenge, no two projects are ever the same, and it's a world full of some of the nicest and most interesting people you'll ever meet. Granted, I might be a little bit biased here, but I absolutely love doing this stuff, and hopefully this was an interesting video to watch, and I hope it gave you a good look behind the curtain as to what it's like to do this stuff as a career. With that, a big thank you to Lunacy Audio for involving me in this project, and a huge thank you to them for allowing me to make this video. I've wanted to do this one for so long, and I'm really happy I finally got to do it. And of course, thank you for watching. I hope you enjoyed it, I hope you learned something, and as always, I hope this inspires you to get out there and make something awesome.